To this day, we still say starving Marvin. Starving Marvin's an Ethiopian kid.
That's just so problematic. Every African was now painted with that same brush. When I read about the IMF, I saw it a lot like a loan shark.
Western countries get to profit essentially from Nigeria's desperation economically without ever having to repay for the fact that they put Nigeria in that position in the first place. Welcome back to Think Twice, your favourite show where we discuss morality, ethics. My name's Sam Tef.
My name's Ben.
And today we're going to discuss a few organisations that we have in mind and talk about, is their impact on the world a net positive or a net negative? It's a new concept that we're trialling, so let us know what you think.
Yeah, it's my little thought baby.
Yeah, your brainchild.
Yeah, I want to see it.
Brainchild?
Yeah, you were right the first time, yeah.
Yeah, so we're going to discuss two organisations in particular and talk about their impact on the global scale. Let's talk about the IMF, the International Monetary Fund.
It was founded in 1944, and it basically monitors the economic health of countries and sort of provides loans for governments in economic distress. And it's usually seen as the last resort.
Yeah, short-term funding for crisis.
Precisely.
Yeah.
To help countries that are really, really struggling.
Do you think that's a net positive or net negative?
When I read about the IMF, I'm not an economist, by the way, so I just wanna say that first of all. And it's not really my strong suit. I'd say this is more your strong suit.
Yeah.
But I saw it a lot like a loan shark. And when is a loan shark ever good? Never really.
I like that analogy.
But I still saw it as a net positive.
No. What are you doing?
I know.
Why have you done that?
Because basically, the countries would be worse off without it. That was basically what my reading was suggesting. They would be worse off with, as horrible as a loan shark is. If you're about to die as a result of not paying this debt, it has to be better than that. It has to be.
You must have been on
an
an IMF website, bro.
I might have had some IMF propaganda.
Yeah.
I might have had some IMF propaganda.
You need to check the address in the top left, bro.
I might have had some IMF propaganda.
I agree with you 100% that they are loan sharks.
They are basically loan sharks. And also, basically, the way the pot is funded is by the richest countries put this money into this pot that these countries under distress take from, eventually. But the problem with that sounds all really nice and stuff. But the problem with that is now all those countries that put in more money have more say. And the way they do it, the difference between a loan shark and the IMF would be a loan shark is out for profit. So they have really high unattainable interest rates. Whilst the IMF isn't so much for profit, but they'll create sanctions on your government which will make it difficult for you to prosper. So sort of keeps you in this hole where it's hard for you to pay back the loan.
So they profit.
So profit in a sense, but not in the same sense as a loan shark. That's what I was trying to differentiate.
Yeah, I think what the IMF do is exactly that. They will give you the money and they'll give you like a certain amount of money that you need as a let's say developing country to build your infrastructure, right? It's like, imagine you go into a loan shark because you need to build some part of your house or you need a car to get to work. You need to spend money on assets that's going to build you up. Except what the IMF do is they say, fine, we'll give you the money, but we're going to impose restrictions on your economy and shape the economy in the way that we see fit.
Yeah.
One of the things they do typically in a lot of the countries that they enter is impose austerity.
Yeah.
Which is reduce public spending.
Increase taxes.
Yeah, increase taxes, reduce
all government-funded programs. Yeah.
Exactly, state help and state subsidies. And what that does is it increases the amount of pressure on the working class because all prices go up because the reductions that the government provide have disappeared overnight. It also reduces the amount of internal prosperity in the economy when you reduce government spending. So like government programs gone, government investment in public services gone. So all of these hit the working class. They also don't allow you to build your country. Your country
I know, but your country. So like the big question was like, if they didn't,
but quickly, what happens is that when you keep these countries in a cycle of debt, like that austerity causes reliance on the IMF debt, right? So as time passes, African countries or developing countries enter a debt cycle with the IMF. And what that allows the IMF to do is to create export economies where Western countries can benefit by extracting resources from those developing countries. That's why they keep the developing countries down. Otherwise, what's the point? They don't care. When you keep those countries down, for example, Nigeria's oil export, like 90% of government revenues comes from oil. Because the Nigerian economy has been decimated. Nigeria used to sell palm oil, cocoa. The agricultural sector was booming. IMF steps in, decimates that part of the economy, and Nigeria is now reliant on selling oil, which is what the West want out of Nigeria. Do you get what I'm trying to say? Whereas the agriculture doesn't do nothing for the West. So the sanctions are placed in a way that benefits the West. And that Nigerian example was replicated over multiple different countries across Africa.
To support your point, more than half of the countries that received loans between 1965 and 1995 weren't better off.
Right.
And 32 were worse off. So
were there any that were better off?
I assume the rest were better off.
Yeah.
But to your point, that Nigeria point, I haven't studied it.
Of course not.
At depth. But I think it might have been the wrong use of the IMF. That might be a factor. Do you know what I mean?
Nigeria's use of the money.
The getting the money from the IMF. Like, you should only use the loan shark if you're about to die.
Nigeria was about to die in the 80s before they entered that it was called a structural adjustment program, SAP. And in 86, they entered this program with the IMF when Nigeria was on the brink of economic collapse. Now, we haven't even touched on the colonial sort of history of all of these developing countries. Nigeria was in a state of economic turmoil because of what Britain did to it, right? In its past.
Course, yeah.
And it's like the IMF comes in and creates a situation where Western countries get to profit essentially from Nigeria's desperation economically without ever having to contend with or repay for the fact that they put Nigeria in that position in the first place.
Yeah.
And it's like, there's no one else out there. I have a feeling that if the IMF didn't exist and wasn't controlled by the US, bear in mind the IMF is headquartered in the US, in Washington, is also its chairman is basically picked by the US president.
Yeah.
If there wasn't an IMF, there'd be some other world body that could achieve what the IMF set out to do initially without the Western influence. Do you see what I'm trying to say? Surely there'd be someone else in their place.
Potentially. Who would be able to do it better, right?
Yeah, or a coalition that wasn't corrupted by the West, right? A coalition where like all countries have equal say. Obviously, the fact that Western countries add more to the pot is what creates their power, right? And it created their power initially. But if we started afresh and had countries with equal say, like a true democracy in the IMF, you'd get fairer outcomes. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yeah. But where I came to my conclusion was Greece. That was my case study, right? So like I looked at Greece, and Greece were on the verge of collapse, right? And if they didn't get 30 billion, I think it was, from the IMF, their whole banking system would have been wiped out.
They're gone.
They would have to exit from the Eurozone, and it would have affected the countries close to it. It would have affected the currency. They would have had to create a brand new currency.
Okay, mad.
Hyperinflation. They wouldn't have been able to get medicines, like essential goods, which then causes so many other problems. And it will then cause unrest in the surrounding countries of Greece.
Right.
And when I think about it like that, I have to think of it as a positive just because of that. Because if you didn't do that how much worse off would you be? And it seems you would be worse off.
You would.
Now, there's exploitation, don't get me wrong. And like, the reason why this whole question around net positive or not is because there's so much bad,
Yeah.
but there might be so much good as well.
There's a conversation to be had. Yeah.
There's conflict. There's not an easy answer. And when we factor it all in, it's like, yeah, it's horrible. They've exploited these people. But if they didn't exploit them, there wouldn't be the people to exploit anymore.
Yeah, the Greece one is tough because I guess I'm less familiar with how the IMF benefited from the Greek situation. But again, I do know at a minimum, the IMF imposed austerity on Greece.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Their inflation was crazy. It was something like 25% unemployment rate. That's unconscionable in the UK or US. You know what I mean? The moment it ticks up just a little bit in the UK, we fucking lose our shit. 25% of people didn't have a job. We're talking about like huge waves of Greek young people would just leave the country because there's no prospects there. And there's a part of me that's like, if the IMF were getting involved, where are the good outcomes in that? Did they pattern it? Did they solve it? They didn't.
They didn't solve it.
Do you get what I'm trying to say? Like, yes, they saved their lives, but they're still on life support.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? They didn't really fix it. And it's like, it's not a good outcome, really.
It's not, is it?
Yeah, like the unemployment rate, I just couldn't believe it when I read about that.
Tough, man.
So tough. You come out, you're a young person, you're going into adulthood, you can't get a job.
No.
You can't get shit. And all your friends are unemployed.
Like, the job's not available. It's not like you can't get a job, they're not there to get.
It's mad. And can the IMF be like, oh, we did a good job there?
No, I don't think so.
Do you know what I mean?
But when I sit there and I say, there's going to probably be more social unrest, you're going to affect other countries as a result around you, and there'll be more poverty.
It's tough to say, innit? It's a bit of a hypothetical, but I just think like if you have all of the West like resources, all of the Western governments behind the IMF, and that was the outcome of your involvement in like Greece's economy, that's a flop. Austerity, like why are we doing austerity?
So
these people are dying already.
What do we think the alternative is? Like, you basically disband the IMF and create a brand new system.
Yes, I would disband the IMF or create a voting system within the IMF that redistributes the power from the Western countries to everyone else. The West would never have that.
No,
it's a bit like the UN, like if you said, oh, let's get rid of veto power, because obviously certain countries have veto power, the US can just unilaterally decide in the UN, this is not happening. The whole world can say, guys, let's stop. If the UN puts their vote in, it's done.
The US puts their vote in.
And it's like, that voting system to me, I'm talking about the UN now, but that favors the people with the, obviously.
Of course.
And I think unless that changes, I can't see how the IMF is a force for good in the world. Your stats back it up, bro. On the whole, it's bad.
On the whole, it's bad.
Yeah.
But it could be worse. That's basically it. Like that's the crux of it.
All right, I see that.
It is really bad, but it could be worse. Like when you use the example of cars, or you go to a loan shark for a car, or you go to a loan shark for money for an asset of some sort.
Crucial assets, though.
Yeah, crucial assets, obviously. The difference is like a car isn't death. You would go to a loan shark for life-threatening surgery.
Yes, of course.
And you would make the argument that that's better than being dead. I would make that argument.
But like I said, they're not alive right now. They're on life support. The thing's beeping, like, they're like, they're not safe. They're about to go anyway. You just prolonged it. You just paid for like more life support machine time.
Yeah, that was essentially what you did.
You just prolonged it a little bit. But they didn't solve it. And I don't know about the Greece situation, but the IMF always eats.
They always
eat. They always get their little piece. They never lose. So I am suspicious of the IMF's involvement in crises. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's an exploitative organization.
100%. And I think it perpetuates like Western supremacy. across the world. Because you think about like, a lot of the developing countries, especially in Africa, their industry, as colonialism ended, their industries were built for extraction. That's the actual infrastructure that they have. The infrastructure that they have is like self-harming, does that make sense?
Yeah.
It's like all of the buildings, tools, roads, it was all built during that time to extract the stuff out of the country.
Yeah.
So like Africa's dealt a doubly bad hand. The first problem is that you are looking for funding and you have to go to places like the IMF for funding, and you're basically going to the West cap in hand. That's number one, that's a problem.
You cause my problem and I have to come to you to fix my problem.
And on top of that, once they get the loan funding, they have to kind of reverse the infrastructure they already have, which is for extraction. And it's like, there's not enough money to do all of these things. You can't fix all these problems all at once. You kind of just have to start again. It's kind of like what Burkina Faso, the Burkina Faso president is doing. He's trying to create a coalition that exists outside of the current paradigm. So he's rejecting IMF money and he's forming coalitions with neighbors in Africa to kind of create their own sort of power block in Africa that's outside of Western influence. And that's kind of the way you need to do it. You can't just start again. Because a lot of this shit is just corrupt. You can't fix
succeed,
something.
basically.
Yeah,
You can't
win.
succeed.
It's tough. And you know, I hope they don't get that guy. Ibrahim Traore, I think his name is. The Burkina Faso president.
Okay.
He's doing big things in Africa right now. We'll see where it goes.
Go on.
Yes.
You might have convinced me.
Yeah?
Yeah, you might have convinced me. Like, I wasn't, it wasn't the hill I was going to die on.
No, I know. I didn't need to push too hard. Yeah.
Give me a tap on the shoulder, I would have followed, you know what I mean? So, yeah, man, it's sad, really. Either way, it's not ideal, man.
It's not ideal at all. Bro. But I think there's definitely hope. A lot of countries are deep in it now. And the West in the past, they killed revolutionaries in Africa. They would literally go in, initiate a coup, kill any revolutionary leader that threatened the Western paradigm. But a lot of Central African countries in particular, they are re-challenging the Western paradigm. And I think they will have success in the near future.
In Jesus' name.
Amen. All right, cool. Let's move on to segment 2. One of the things that we found interesting was Fuse ODG criticizing BandAid this Christmas. Obviously, BandAid had their 40th anniversary of their hit single, Do They Know It's Christmas? And a lot of what Fuse ODG's argument was criticizing BandAid's impact on the global scale and the impact that that's had on Africa. And he made the claim that the impact of BandAid was a net negative. Benz, do you think BandAid's impact is a net negative or a net positive?
I think it's a net positive.
Okay. All right. Should we do a quick background on BandAid?
So, BandAid basically begun because it brought global attention to an Ethiopian famine. And it basically was there to create a large-scale sort of charity efforts to help people in Ethiopia.
Correct.
And that's what it did. It raised significant money for people in Ethiopia.
It did.
And it has like great cultural significance 40 years ago. And I think every 10 years, they've released a new song.
Yeah, so this was BandAid 40, this one.
2024. And what you said was right. Fuse ODG basically said it did more harm than the good it did.
Mm-hmm.
And which was actually backed by Ed Sheeran. And it brought us to the question, net positive or not. And the reason why I sat on net positive was because neither of us were alive in 1984.
Of course.
To understand how people, I'll give you some context. I combed through the comments on quite a few videos.
The actual music video of the song or like other commentary videos?
Other commentary videos.
Got you.
And it seemed the sort of sentiment around Africa at the time wasn't great.
Okay.
And that helped people care for Africa.
Right.
But we have to acknowledge the damage it also did, creating and forcing people to think of Africa as a monolith rather than a continent of separate countries, which it is. And the problem was Ethiopia's problem. And Fuse ODG said Ukraine has a problem. You don't paint Europe as the whole thing because it does damage to the whole of Europe. And that's what BandAid has done, really. And the reason why I said it as a net positive is because it saved lives.
It did save lives, for sure.
Although it may have done irreparable damage to our generation, but maybe not future generations. If, you know, the work that we do here and the work that other people do has impact. But to our generation, it did irreparable damage.
What sort of damage do you think it did for our generation? Because I'm probably going to agree with you here on the damage it did.
Yeah, like my issue was, like, as a child, I used to, like, skip those adverts. I couldn't watch them, like, I could not watch black children with flies on their faces. I didn't like it. Like, I really, really didn't like it. And maybe Bob Geldof wasn't aware of that. My issue lies with the white saviour complex that happens from BandAid also.
100%, 100%. The paternalistic relationship that the West has with Africa.
Precisely. And their inability to accept that also. Because if Fuse ODG is saying, this is a problem, look, like, guys, look what the damage you've done. Insurance come out and said, look at the damage you've done. And then on top of that, you still haven't wanted to change. That's a problem, bro.
Big problem.
That's a huge problem. But because I value human life so highly, I think it has to be a net positive based on that, because thousands, maybe millions of lives were saved.
Yeah. I agree with you. I think it is a net positive, but only just.
Only just.
Only just. It's fucking squeaking it here. And I agree with you on the damage it did. Obviously, as an Ethiopian, you can imagine how I felt when I saw my fellow countrymen on the TV screens suffering from famine, with flies on their face, looking unfortunate, ill, near death. And how that makes you feel as an Ethiopian, like, this is the portrayal of my country across the world. It hurt a lot. And there's no way I was watching the screen when that shit was on. And like we at that time, like, we were kids, we didn't really understand, like, the wider picture, really.
Of course.
But it still feels wrong, you know what I mean? To put that kid up there and exploit that kid to emotionally manipulate people to donate or whatever it might be. But I think for that entire thing, you know, the song came out, it went #1 instantly. The next summer in the summer of '85,
Actually, didn't even go #1 instantly.
Yeah, I thought it went #1 that December.
Eventually.
Right, okay.
But it wasn't for Christmas. Wham! Actually were #1.
Oh.
With Last Christmas.
So they took the #1 back by Christmas?
I think they took it back after Christmas. And all of Wham donated all of its proceeds to...
Okay. Yeah, the famine response. Yeah. And I think in total, they estimated that, you know, the BandAid and Live Aid raised about $150 million to the relief effort, which is a significant amount of money, let's be real. And I think the total effort was about $2 billion. So for, you know, BandAid to have raised that much, I think is a significant amount. And there's no doubt that saved lives. And I think in that particular moment, it's important to have the immediate response. But like you say, for the lasting impact, it's damaging. Like, is painting Africa, like, if you think about the lyrics of the song.
The lyrics, yeah.
The lyrics of the song is like, at Christmas time is hard, but while you're having fun, there's a world outside your window, and there's a world full of dread and fear, where a kiss of love can kill you. You're basically saying Africa is a world of dread and fear.
Yeah.
Like, and when, like you said, people were ignorant at that time about the reality of Africa, you're filling that gap of that void, information with that.
With misinformation, basically.
Yeah.
Like, one of the lyrics was, there's no peace and joy in West Africa.
Oh.
I'm telling you, my brothers were in Nigeria this last week.
Yeah.
We're in Nigeria for Christmas. And they had a lot of peace and a lot of joy.
Yeah, facts.
In West Africa.
Facts. And it's a mad thing to say. Let's even say it was true. It's a mad thing for you as a white guy to write down on a piece of paper and sing into a mic. Who the hell are you? Like, one of my problems, and you touched on it, with BandAid, the inception of BandAid, is that there weren't Africans involved from the start. So 40 years later, when an African tells you, look, guy, this don't work for Africans. This doesn't work for, he's Ghanaian, Fuse ODG. It doesn't work for Ghana, doesn't work for any country in Africa. And you're like, well, I wrote the song's done, like, I can't change it now. it just shows like how different it could have been if you had Africans involved from the start. If you had African voices in the inception of BandAid and Live Aid, the lasting impact of it could have been so much better. And some of those negative connotations could have been avoided. Do you know what I mean?
100%.
It could have been avoided so easily. And like, if we think about the lasting impact, you know Starving Marvin. He's a South Park character. In one of the episode is called Starving Marvin. And he, like the boys, like they win a raffle or something, and the prize that they win is like a starving kid from Ethiopia, and he comes off the plane and Starving
really?
Marvin. And it's just like this skinny black kid who's just unfortunate. It's just a sad, he just paints a sad picture. And like to this day, we still say Starving Marvin. You will have heard someone say, oh, when they're hungry, I'm Starving Marvin. That is lasting impact. That's 40 years after the fact.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And Starving Marvin's an Ethiopian kid. There are Americans right now to this day that associate Ethiopia with famine.
Yeah.
Because that's what they know. That's what all they've seen. And I think is very harmful, and it negates the beauty, prosperity, and innovation that Africa has to offer.
And what I think gets lost a lot is when, and it's a human thing, like when you tell someone this is wrong, their first response is to say, but we did all of this that helped.
Defense.
And it's true. Two things can be true. Everything means something, something doesn't mean everything. And you need to sort of accept that, like that, oh, we may have just kind of done it wrong, but our intentions were right. How can we now bridge that gap? And when I was combing through the comments, it was sort of like, oh, fuck off Ed Sheeran, fuck off Fuse, like, it's done good. And it's we can't just accept that. We can't just accept that, yeah, there's probably a net positive overall, but it's done so much harm. We have to find a way to do better, no?
100%, 100%. And like, we got to embrace the complexity, like, it can have done good and have a bad lasting impact. It's not just like one or the other. And I think in the YouTube comments, people are just like, I want one answer.
Yeah.
I want to just have it,
It's
have it black
easier
and
to
white.
accept, isn't it?
Yeah,
Like, it's
easy
so
to
much
accept.
easier to accept when this is right, this is wrong. Like the brain, I think, naturally wants to be able to say this is right and this is wrong, and then create emotions towards the answer that you believe to be true.
100%.
But yeah, it's just a little bit, it's just far more nuanced than that.
It's tough as well. Like, imagine if you've enjoyed that song for the last 40 years, or you donated to BandAid. In some respect, if you accept Fuse ODG or anyone's critique about BandAid, it feels like a personal attack to you. It's like you did the wrong thing at that time. When it's not that simple. Like, you probably helped at that time, but let's now listen to the Africans when they speak. Do you know what I mean? The erasure's mad. Like, the moment the black guy speaks about the African problem, it's like, oh, shut up.
Yeah.
Like, oh, here we fucking go again. You know what I mean?
Here we go again.
You know that Starving Marvin thing? Starving Marvin as an episode was the most successful episode in South Park's history. So that episode reached 8 million American people. 8 million people. Wow. It's just crazy to think that, like, in the 80s, white Americans were turning on their screens and associating Ethiopianness with hunger, famine, and unfortunateness.
That's not even... That's obviously a major problem, but it's not even just Ethiopia. It was every African was now painted with that same brush. And that's just so problematic for black people, because not only does it affect then Africans, it then affects black people around the world.
Everywhere. Across the Western world, like, you can imagine kids going to school, the lens through which their peers see them.
Yeah.
It's a mad situation for kids to be in.
Because when those white kids are young, they've spent all their Christmases, all their time with probably other white people. And then they go to school, and when they're finally socialized with other black people, the association that they have is what they've seen on television with black people with flies on their face. And yeah, it's just so horrible that that's happened. And what I don't love about our conversation now is we're talking about what's wrong with it when we think it's a net positive. You know what I mean? So we also do have to pay credit to the fact that they did something.
Absolutely.
It's so easy to say something, but they did something.
100%.
To help people.
They did what for most people would be impossible to do.
Precisely.
They pulled it off.
Exactly. And that's amazing in and of itself.
I guess, though, in the wider society, Bob Geldof has his praise. He's got enough praise. He doesn't need additional praise from me and you here.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Like he's.
But I just want to be fair. Like,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Let's
Like,
be fair. Let's be fair.
Like, we call that a net positive. They talk about how much negative it's done. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Fair. Fair play.
All right. Thank you for joining us.
Been
We
a pleasure.
appreciate you. Much love.
See you next week. All cameras are on.
Ah, good. We're cooking.
Nice. Let's go. Discuss BandAid this Christmas. No, bear with me, bro. Bear with me. I've not flexed that muscle thing.
That won't be possible, I'm afraid.
Oh, is it?
Yeah. Lovely.